Hi there, my name is Pete. Umkali has secured his dream job of being a guide on the battlefields, so he has asked me to step in as I have studied the Boer War for quite some time. In previous episodes you looked at the Irish involvement in the Boer War, and just like the Irish, the Americans fought for both sides, often against each other. It is estimated that there were about 200 to 300 Americans on each side in the Boer War, but it is impossible to know the exact number, as there was no official American regiment on either side. For the British Army, the Americans tended to be in the irregular units, as well as the yeomanry. In the Boer Army there were a number of Americans who had been in the country for quite a while before the outbreak of war, and were therefore integrated into the local commandos. However, a sizable proportion of the Americans fighting with the Boers were in the Irish Transvaal Brigade. We will concentrate on individual Americans who made a name for themselves as a result of the Boer War. Possibly the most well-known American in the Boer War, or at least on the Boers' side, was Colonel John Y. F. Blake. There is also an Irish connection, as Blake received the colonelcy of the Irish Transvaal Brigade, an appointment endorsed by the de facto founder of the Irish Brigade, John McBride. John Young Fillmore Blake, a West Point graduate and officer in the 6th U.S. Cavalry Regiment in Arizona, had attended Arkansas State University at Fayetteville, and when he turned 20, enrolled in the United States Military Academy at West Point. He graduated on June 12, 1880, and received the rank of second lieutenant. A hint of Blake's rebellious spirit surfaced at West Point, where he was cited for throwing bread in the mess hall, smoking, using foul language, and striking a horse with a saber at cavalry exercise. He graduated at the bottom quarter of his class, 40th out of a class of 53. Blake served 13 years in the U.S. 6th Cavalry, many of those years spent at Fort Leavenworth. He spent some time in the deserts of the Navajo and the Apache to the south and southwest of the Grand Canyon. In 1887, he received a promotion to first lieutenant and the following year an appointment as commander of a group of Navajo Scouts. Blake retired from the Army to Grand Rapids, Michigan, where he managed a railroad business. Blake left Michigan in search of more adventures in Africa. He stated that he traveled to South Africa because the gold mining prospects were attracting adventurers from every part of the world. While there, Blake wrote about his experiences for several American and London newspapers. He arrived in Johannesburg shortly before the Jameson Raid. He joined with the Boers at the outbreak of war, as described in his memoir, A West Pointer with the Boers.
On October 1, 1899, there were more than 10,000 burghers on the Natal border, and at the same time the Free State burghers had assembled on the border of the colony. It was at this time that the Irish and the Irish Americans of Johannesburg and Pretoria, about 300 strong, had assembled, and asked me to take command of them to help the Boers in their battle for freedom. I accepted the command on the condition that not one of them would expect or accept 1 cent of money for his services, and that all would fight purely for their love of liberty and for downtrodden Ireland. This condition having been unanimously accepted, horses, arms, ammunition, etc. were at once procured, and off we went for the Natal border, where we joined the Boers on October 6th. It was quick work, but it is so easy to do things quickly, with a command of true and patriotic Irishmen, overjoyed and brimming full of enthusiasm at the prospect of giving a blow to Ireland's lifelong enemy and oppressor.
At the Battle of Mort-de-Fontaine in October 1899, Blake was severely injured.
It was about this time, 8 o'clock, that a shell caught me, smashed both the bones of my arm near the elbow, cut the tendon, nerve, and artery, and completely paralyzed my whole arm. I went to my horse about 300 yards away and was fortunate to find him alive, because most of them near him had been killed. A young Boer boy helped me to mount, and I managed to reach a hospital tent about a mile away. But it was a close call, for I had grown very weak from loss of so much blood. As I passed my camp, I could not help smiling, for it was completely destroyed, and I knew that when the Irish boys saw it again, there would be plenty of Irish wit in the air. At the conclusion of the battle, Commandant General Pete Joubert called up the Irish boys, thanked them, congratulated them, and told them that the brave stand they had made and their serving of Long Tom had prevented a grave disaster and enabled the Boers to gain a great victory over the enemy.
Blake was forced to relinquish command of the brigade to John McBride. He resumed command when he was sufficiently recovered in early December. Whilst recovering, he refused to leave the brigade and stayed with his men for the siege of Ladysmith and the Battle of Colenso.
Soon the plain of Colenso was strewn with dead and wounded Irish Tommies, and at the very time when the battle was raging at its highest pitch, ambulances in great numbers rushed into the field, apparently to assist the unfortunate, but in fact to stop the Boers in their deadly work. Screened by these ambulances, 12 Armstrong cannon came into the field, but the quick eye of Captain Pretorius detected them, and at once he sent some shells that landed among them. These then scattered and fled for safety and exposed the 12 cannon to the Boer and his Mauser. Artillerymen and artillery horses were quickly shot down, and the guns rendered useless.
By January 1900, the British Embassy in Washington protested to the United States government about the strong Irish movement within the United States that attempted to recruit American men to fight for the Boers. Irish Americans, in particular, gathered resources and monies to help the Boers in any way possible, and at one stage talked about sending 5,000 men to South Africa. In the end, the ancient order of Hibernians collected funds for a much smaller expedition. American law forbade recruitment of American citizens to fight in foreign armies. It was for that reason that a small contingent of Irish Americans, roughly 50 men in total, funded by the ancient order of Hibernians, volunteered their services as a Red Cross ambulance corps. The American war correspondent, Richard Harding Davis, who traveled some of the way with the ambulance corps, made it clear that nobody was under any illusion as to the true nature of this body of men.
Everyone on the train to Pretoria knew why each came. The Chicago Irish Americans just laughed and winked at the sight of the transformation. They found that the Red Cross badges became burdensome and tight, for it was stopping the circulation of the fighting blood in their Irish veins.
Davis noted that 2 days later, all but 5 of the Chicago contingent had ripped off the Red Cross that allowed them entry into the country. As the train got closer and closer to Pretoria, and at each and every stop along the way, more Boer fighters joined the group. Colonel Blake had been told to expect about 1,000 fighters from Chicago, and he recounts in his book his surprise when upon their arrival in Pretoria, Blake saw the American Ambulance Corps of 58 men from Chicago. He inquired from their commanding officer, Captain Patrick O'Connor of the Clannar Gale Guards, as to the whereabouts of the rest of the fighters. O'Connor answered, "We are the fighters. No more coming that we know of." The Chicago Ambulance Corps joined the Irish Transvaal Brigade and participated in all the major battles and other skirmishes carried out by the brigade. In the later part of the war, Colonel Blake created a small squad of men tasked with blowing up the bridges utilized by the British supply lines. After he convinced the young General Louis Botha on the importance of such a task, Blake called for volunteers to accomplish this duty. Blake records that no one responded other than the Irish boys, who were the only ones among the Boers that understood the business. This was primarily due to their experience in the mines, which often involved blasting with dynamite. The Irish Brigade was effectively given the responsibility to blow the bridges, thereby slowing the British advance. Ironically, as these Irish and Irish-American men destroyed the bridges, 2 American officers with the British Army repaired them. After the Irish dynamite squad destroyed the bridge over the Sand River, the Americans Major Seymour and Clemens of the British Army tried to repair the bridge, but General Davet and his men killed them. Blake did not shed a tear on hearing about the death of the 2 American majors. He condemned them as mercenaries. One could argue that he was correct, as all the Americans serving with the British were paid, whereas those who sided with the Boers were not. Blake was always of the opinion that the Boers did not enjoy destroying property and so did not destroy as much railway track or bridges as they should have done. He regarded this failure as one of the major reasons that the Boers lost the war.
On the 5th of June, we had to leave Pretoria, and, strange to say, we left the Petersburg and Delagoa railway lines, all in good order, with plenty of engines and cars for immediate use by the English. Why? General Boerta insisted on leaving all these lines intact and well equipped for the English. I cannot understand. There was not a burgher in the field that did not realize that the destruction of all railway facilities was a matter of grave importance. Much as I admire General Boerta, not only as a brave man, but as a first-class fighter and an able general, I must condemn him for his opposition to the destruction of the enemy's communications, and for his failure to destroy the enemy's supply stores.
The British had such a huge army, spread over considerable distances, that they were absolutely reliant on the railway to move men and supplies. Accordingly, one can only say that Blake was absolutely correct in his analysis. Once the siege of Ladysmith was lifted and Field Marshal Roberts, with massive reinforcements, began the march to Pretoria and Bloemfontein, the guerrilla phase of the war began. Many of the Irish Brigade continued to blow up bridges to slow the British advance. However, as guerrilla warfare required an extensive knowledge of the topography of the land, the Boers decided that the Irish would not be suited to this type of warfare. The Irish Transvaal Brigade disbanded after the Battle of Bergendal, and most of the remaining members, including John McBride, crossed over into Mozambique, then called Lorenzo Marx, and made their way back to Ireland and America. Blake did not. He remained and fought with the commandos during the guerrilla phase, and reports indicate that he went native, preferring to speak Afrikaans rather than his native tongue. At the general surrender, Blake did turn over his rifle and left South Africa shortly afterwards. He returned to America a hero and, capitalizing on this newfound fame, embarked on a lecture tour around the country.
Thanks very much for joining me. When we meet again, we will be looking at some Americans who fought with the British. Tot ziens.